Hello. Okay, let's do Rambler number 5. But before that, let's talk about Rambler number 4. So I had a chance to think about it and digest it, so to speak, from yesterday's reading. And I believe that what Dr. Johnson is doing with Rambler number 4 is describing for us a species of writing which would be regarded as, for him, the more modern type of writing that deals with life more as we find it, rather than the more idealized or maybe fantasized perspective of earlier generations, earlier than 1750, where almost more fanciful conventions of circumstances, non-realistic circumstances with like knights and giants and fairies, etc., might be the circumstance where a writer might place their characters and their circumstance. I keep coming to mind things like C.S. Lewis, Narnia, or The Hobbit, circumstances like that. And Dr. Johnson talks about how a writer could more easily construct such a world and then place a circumstance and a setting there. And they've got a book. Versus what to him was the more contemporary author's challenge of producing a story that was grounded in the more real here and now of the 18th century, and then to put at odds the challenges of good versus bad, and have heroes and heroines that live their lives as we do. He said that was the more pressing challenge of the day at his time, and that it was a more difficult type of writing because it required grounding and better grounding in what life was really like to pull off. There was more to it there, but that's the main thrust of what I got. Okay, let's read Rambler number 5 now for Tuesday, April 3rd, 1750. Now every field, every tree is green. Now genial nature's fairest face is seen. Elphinston. Every man is sufficiently discontented with some circumstance of his present state to suffer his imagination to range more or less in quest of future happiness, and to fix upon some point of time in which, by the removal of the inconvenience which now perplexes him, or acquisition of the advantage which he at present wants, he shall find the condition of his life very much improved. When this time, which is too often expected with great impatience, at last arrives, it generally comes without the blessing for which it was desired. But we solace ourselves with some new prospect, and press forward again with equal eagerness. It is lucky for a man in whom this temper prevails, when he turns his hopes upon things wholly out of his own power, since he forbears then to precipitate his affairs for the sake of the great event that is to complete his felicity, and waits for the blissful hour with less neglect of the measures necessary to be taken in the meantime. I have long known a person of this temper, who indulged his dream of happiness with less hurt to himself than such chimerical wishes commonly produce, and adjusted his scheme with such address that his hopes were in full bloom 3 parts of the year, and in the other part never wholly blasted. Many, perhaps, would be desirous of learning by what means he procured to himself such a cheap and lasting satisfaction. It was gained by a constant practice of referring the removal of all his uneasiness to the coming of the next spring. If his health was impaired, the spring would restore it. If what he wanted was at a high price, it would fall its value in the spring. The spring, indeed, did often come without any of these effects, but he was always certain that the next would be more propitious, nor was ever convinced that the present spring would fail him before the middle of summer. For he always talked of the spring as coming till it was past, and when it was once past, everyone agreed with him that it was coming. By long converse with this man, I am perhaps brought to feel immoderate pleasure in the contemplation of this delightful season. But I have the satisfaction of finding many whom it can be no shame to resemble, infected with the same enthusiasm, for there is, I believe, scarce any poet of eminence who has not left some testimony of his fondness for the flowers, the zephyrs, and the warblers of the spring. Nor has the most luxuriant imagination been able to describe the serenity and happiness of the golden age, otherwise than by giving a perpetual spring as the highest reward of uncorrupted innocence. There is, indeed, something inexpressibly pleasing in the annual renovation of the world, and the new display of the treasure of nature. The cold and darkness of winter, with the naked deformity of every object on which we turn our eyes, makes us rejoice at the succeeding season, as well for what we have escaped as for what we may enjoy. And every budding flower, which the warm situation brings early to our view, is considered by us a messenger to notify the approach of more joyous days. The spring affords to a mind so free from the disturbance of cares or passions as to be vacant to calm amusements almost everything that our present state makes us capable of enjoying. The variegated verdure of the fields, the woods, the succession of grateful odors, the voice of pleasure pouring out its notes on every side, with the gladness apparently conceived by every animal, from the growth of his food and the clemency of the weather, throw over the whole earth an air of gaiety, significantly expressed by the smile of nature. Yet there are men to whom these scenes are able to give no delight, and who hurry away from all the varieties of rural beauty to lose their hours and divert their thoughts by cards or assemblies, a tavern dinner, or the prattle of the day. It may be laid down as a position which will seldom deceive, that when a man cannot bear his own company, there is something wrong. He must fly from himself, either because he feels a tediousness in life, from the equipoise of an empty mind, which, having no tendency to one motion more than another, but as it is impelled by some external power, must always have recourse to foreign objects, or he must be afraid of the intrusion of some unpleasing idea, and perhaps is struggling to escape from the remembrance of a loss, the fear of a calamity, or some other thought of greater horror. Those whom sorrow incapacitates to enjoy the pleasure of contemplation may properly apply to such diversions, provided they are innocent, as lay strong hold on the attention. And those whom fear of any future affliction chains down to misery must endeavor to obviate the danger. My consideration shall on this occasion be turned on such as are burdensome to themselves, merely because they want subjects for reflection, and to whom the volume of nature is thrown open without affording them pleasure or instruction, because they never learn to read the characters. A French author has advanced this seeming paradox, that very few men know how to take a walk. And indeed, it is true that few know how to take a walk with the prospect of any other pleasure than the same company would have afforded them at home. There are animals that borrow their color from the neighboring body, and consequently vary their hue as they happen to change their place. In like manner, it ought to be the endeavor of every man to derive his reflections from the objects about him. For it is to no purpose that he alters his position, if his attention continues fixed to the same point. The mind should be kept open to the access of every new idea, and so far disengaged from the predominance of particular thoughts as easily to accommodate itself to occasional entertainment. A man that has formed his habit of turning every new object to his entertainment finds in the productions of nature an inexhaustible stock of materials upon which he can employ himself without any temptations to envy or malevolence. Faults, perhaps, seldom totally avoided by those whose judgment is much exerted upon the works of art. He has always a certain prospect of discovering new reasons for adoring the sovereign author of the universe, and probable hopes of making some discovery of benefit to others or of profit to himself. There is no doubt but many vegetables and animals have qualities that might be of great use to the knowledge of which there is not required much force of penetration or fatigue of study, but only frequent experiments and close attention. What is said by the chemists of their darling mercury is perhaps true of every body through the whole creation, that if 1,000 lives should be spent upon it, all its properties would not be found out. Mankind must necessarily be diversified by various tastes, since life affords and requires such multiplicity of employments, and a nation of naturalists is neither to be hoped or desired, but it is surely not improper to point out a fresh amusement to those who languish in health and repine in plenty, for want of some source of diversion that may be less easily exhausted, and to inform the multitudes of both sexes who are burdened with every new day that there are many shows which they have not seen. He that enlarges his curiosity after the works of nature demonstrably multiplies the inlets to happiness, and therefore the younger part of my readers, to whom I dedicate this vernal speculation, must excuse me for calling upon them to make use at once of the spring of the year and the spring of life, to acquire, while their minds may be yet impressed with new images, a love of innocent pleasures, and an ardor for useful knowledge, and to remember that a blighted spring makes a barren year, and that the vernal flowers, however beautiful and gay, are only intended by nature as preparatives to autumnal fruits. Okay, now what I got from that, I'm going to try to summarize it now. It was a little hard to do it and wait today. What I got from that was the impression, of course, of the spring, his reflection of the one man who would always be looking to the spring of life, looking to literally to each spring as a renewing time and a time of opportunity, and that while the current spring was happening, he would rejoice, and then as soon as it was done, well, wasn't the next spring on the way? Likewise, the spring of life, of youth. He talked also about the ability to adjust one's mind, to be accommodating the circumstance of where we are. He used the description of taking a walk and having our mind in the moment of now at the walk, enjoying the things around us, filling our mind, occupying our thoughts with what was actually before us, versus taking whatever preoccupation was in our mind before the walk along with us, in which case we might as well not have walked. And then lastly, he applies this to the youth, who he charges to keep that frame of mind during their youthful years, to enjoy the spring of life with prospects are fresh and new and numerous, and to gain much. And as he said, a springtime that is not very fruitful will yield a barren summer. He said it much better than I did. But so when you're young, keep your mind tuned to whatever circumstance you're in. Get out, experience life, appreciate the fruits of your youthful perspective that will then lay up a wonderful store of knowledge and impressions to use throughout the rest of one's life. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I really enjoyed reading that.